Hi, everybody. It's Miss Corbett here. It is about 12:30 on Wednesday, September 9th. I hope you had a wonderful and relaxing Labor Day break. I have now finished reviewing what we did in Module 3, and I want to talk about it, especially to give feedback on those two big assignments we did. So let me get up our Module 3 overview. We really did two big things in Module 3. First, we focused on what it means to kind of analyze a text, especially to analyze it rhetorically. You did the reading, watched that brief video, and then I asked you to submit to the Rhetorical Reading Journal using the article that you will be using for your rhetorical analysis essay. Remember, I'm not going to compare these, so if later on down the line you decide to change it, that's fine. But these steps are so important in starting to prepare your rhetorical analysis that if you change text, I recommend coming back to these questions and doing the same steps with whatever new text you choose. So when I was looking through these, we're still at a brainstorming process. What I want you to be doing is thinking through these questions. So I didn't go in and leave feedback because we're still in the process of learning it all. But I read them all, and I have a few points that I want to clarify or reiterate related to two main questions from this list. The first is the question of target audience, which, as I've mentioned before, is one of the toughest parts, but also one of the most crucial parts of any analysis. We can't analyze how well a text is achieving its goals, how effective it is, if we don't know who it's trying to reach. So we have to think about audience. But I want to be clear about some things when we're identifying audience. First, to know that audience is not always, or even often, the same as the subject of the piece. So if you're talking about kids, 5-year-olds in an article, that doesn't mean you're talking to 5-year-olds, right? Those are different things. The subject and the audience are different things. If, for instance, the article is talking about something a certain group already knows, if the title of the article, for instance, says, "We already knew this," then it's probably not talking to those people either. Why write an article to somebody if you're telling them what they already know? I wouldn't write an article to a bunch of Georgia residents saying summer is hot in Georgia, right? We already know that. So if you're writing an article where you're saying this demographic knows this stuff already, then they're probably not targeting that demographic. If the article uses us or our or we, those kind of collective personal pronouns, first person pronouns, well, then that might be an indicator that the target audience, that the writer belongs to that target audience, right? We say this because you're part of the group of people who are doing it. Keep in mind that it's also not likely to be two disparate groups at once. It's probably not parents and their kids. Targeting parents and targeting kids would be you'd use totally different approaches, right? The same word choice or logic that works for your parents might not work for you. So in most cases, a communicator is not trying to target two completely different audiences at the same time. It can happen, but it's uncommon. If the article advocates for any solutions, it might be targeting the groups of people who can actually enact those solutions. If I'm going to be arguing for, let's say, that Kennesaw needs to start offering up more parking spaces, well, I'm probably talking to the people who could actually do that, right? I'm not just talking to you saying we need more parking spaces. You and I agree on that, right? If I'm writing an article advocating for that, I'm probably targeting the people who actually have the political power to make that happen. You want to consider publication as well. Each of our potential articles for this assignment, for our rhetorical analyses, come from a different publication. And though you're not going to be doing outside research where you talk a lot about these publications or their readership or their demographics or whatever about that, you want to be paying some attention to it. If it is for instance, higher education related publication, well, that tells you something. They're probably not going to be targeting college students in something that targets typically faculty. If they're writing in Teen Vogue, they're probably not targeting the administration of the school, right? That you wouldn't place it there if you wanted to target those people. Also remember that target audiences, it's not exclusionary. The writers hope other people will read their work. So just because information might be useful to someone, just because some group of people might learn from it or like to read it, doesn't mean that's who the author is targeting. There might be lots of people who would do well for reading this article, right? There might be lots of people who are interested in it and therefore look it up. But that's not the same thing as who the author is trying to target. So we don't want to just think about who might be interested in the topic, and we don't just want to think about all the people who might read it and enjoy it. We're thinking about who was the author trying to reach. And every one of these authors in these articles, they would be thrilled if people from all kinds of groups read their article, right? They published it. They want it to be read. But that doesn't mean that they're targeting everybody. The word target, right? That means we're zeroing in on one group. So you want to remember that. It's not exclusionary. It doesn't need to leave people out. It just means who are you aiming it at? Whatever you choose as far as identifying your audience in rhetorical analysis, remember that you're going to need to back up all impressions with specific examples of the text. And that really goes for things beyond audience. That goes for any consideration of pathos, ethos, and logos, any of those things. You have to be able to talk about specific parts of the text. And please understand, I mean specific. Individual word choice is a great example of specific. They use this word instead of that word, and that tells me X. Right? We're getting very granular. We're looking at very specific things. It's not just enough to say, I know that this is who they're talking to because they make a lot of mention about this thing. I want you to give me a quote, a specific paragraph, a place where that thing happened. And particularly with pathos, though this is true with all of them, you want to think about not just what they are saying, but how they say it. Right? What word choice do they use? If they're using a lot of terms that are kind of related to illegal behavior, well, that is a pathos or pathetic, that's the word pathetic, attempt, right? Not pathetic as in pitiful, but pathetic as in of pathos. So we want to think about not just what they're saying, but how they say it. I also want to call attention to the last prompt we look at, number 6, where I asked you, which of the strategies in the previous answers do you think is the most significant for achieving the purpose of the text? This is just to get us thinking about, okay, they're not going to be using all kinds of approaches to the same degree. It is not just using all three, right? When you're analyzing your text in your essay, you're not just going to say they use pathos, ethos, and logos, because virtually no text uses equal amounts of each appeal, nor uses them in exactly the same way. So we've got to think more about, okay, what is the overarching thing here that they're using? What is their primary means and what form is it taking? But also you want to be able to go further with that, to be thinking about not just what the piece is doing, but why and how it's effective or ineffective for its target audience. Again, going back to audience. Remember, not all strategies work equally well with all audiences and purposes. If my 6-year-old nephew is staying over at my house and I want to get him to brush his teeth, it would not be effective for me to put up flow charts and statistics and scholarly studies about the benefits of brushing your teeth. That would not convince him of a dang thing, right? So you have to be able to explain why the respective appeals and strategies work for the text's specific audience. So if you're going to say this article uses a lot of pathos, you got to tell me why pathos is an appropriate approach with that specific audience. We don't want to forget that important part of it. It's not just saying they did it. It's not just that for any type of writing situation, it's good to use these things. We're looking at it very specifically in the context of this text's purpose and audience. All right, I also want to talk about the balanced summaries discussion board. For the most part, the summary part of it, particularly the language to a specific audience, the formality levels, that kind of thing, most of us were nailing that stuff. A lot of us stumbled, though, and I got some emails about it in advance, some questions about this idea of whether the audience agrees or disagrees, particularly when we're asking for the summaries to be objective. So I want to say a little bit about why I included that and why that purpose is there. So I added the agree and disagree part to the directions to get us to start thinking about more than just who an audience is as far as their demographics go, but to also consider what they might think and how they might already feel about the subject matter. We can still be objective in our summaries, right? We can present the text without taking a side on it, but it can help to know whether our audience is likely to already agree with it or likely not to. That agree and disagree is to give us more information about our target audiences in writing these summaries. Admittedly, on a practical level, much of the time that you're including summaries in your own essays, they won't be completely objective. At least you'll be presenting them in a way to as long as they're accurate to the source, you might be highlighting or explaining things in certain terms to give us the tone you want, to help us see your position. But what I want us to first practice objectively doing it before we start putting in our own opinions. First, because that's really when it boils down to it at its heart, what a summary is. But also because I want us to start thinking about evidence, like a text, like quotes, like data, as kind of inherently neutral, right? The same piece of data could be used to support a variety of arguments, right? So first we've got to understand what the data says, and then we think of it as something we can use and explain and connect to lead someone to what it is we're wanting them to see. Certainly some evidence will work better for some arguments than others, but again, think of it as like a statistic. A single statistic, it's going to be neutral. It's up to us to explain how that statistic supports our position. So before we're able to do all that, right, that's a glimpse down to what we're going to be doing as we move forward in the semester. Let's just make sure we can do an objective job of representing accurately what a source says without getting distracted by our own feelings about the source's argument. But I wanted us to think about this agree and disagree because formality level and word choice are not the only things that audience tells us. It can tell us that, right? We did really well with understanding word choice that would be different with our friends than with our professors, largely because it's something you already do, right? So much of this rhetorical study is not about learning new ways to interact with the world. It's about acknowledging the things you already do and build on those and strengthen them so you can take those skills and be more effective with them. You already know just naturally that you talk to your friends differently than you talk to your professors. So as far as word choice and tone and that kind of thing, we really nailed it with those. But it also tells us some stuff about how they might feel about the certain topic, what priorities and values they hold. When we're identifying a target audience and evaluating how well a text reaches that audience, and that's whether we're analyzing someone else's text or trying to write our own, we want to consider not just their demographics, not just the formality level. Knowing how an audience might feel about a topic already allows us to structure our summaries to highlight the kinds of information they might find most compelling or that might get them to pay the most attention. Consider, for instance, I grabbed a couple of examples from our discussion boards this week. Two different people, both from class W03. In the first one, Zoe Johnston is targeting, and this is just part of hers, is targeting, as you know, friends and people who already agree with the topic. They already think cursive handwriting should die. So here she really kind of just goes through the main points. You know, this is what the guy says. She emphasizes the first thing we get. It says in this article, he talks about how insignificant the form of writing, this cursive form of writing truly is. Unless by choice, it's never really used since communication is almost always on computers or phones or written by print. So already talking about kind of the practical uses, which if somebody who agrees that cursive is kind of outmoded, that makes sense to them, right? That's a thing that they're like, yeah, okay, I agree with that. Compare that to Roberts. This is his more formal approach. He introduces the text pretty much the same, uses different language, of course, emphasizes that the person is an assistant professor of education. That's something that wouldn't really matter to the friends, but does matter to the faculty. And then he jumps into talking about the Common Core standards. Because I told you that these professors would be less likely to agree with the topic, they're already kind of disagreeing or hesitant about it, then it makes sense to lead with evidence with them. To say, here's some hard evidence, here's some data. Not necessarily because we're trying to convince them, right? We're still writing objective summaries, but because we want them to pay attention and hear us out. If we started just talking about, well, nobody uses it anymore, well, faculty who are used to thinking about, the learning outcomes and the evidence about how we learn and what it does for students, if we're just talking kind of anecdotally to those people, they might stop reading it altogether, right? They might not even finish the paragraph. But if you get them from the beginning to be thinking about, oh, these are Common Core standards, this is stuff that is researched and there's a lot of smart minds behind this, then they might be more likely to hear it out. Even, again, if we're not trying to persuade them to feel it this way, at least they'd read it. So I hope you see that when we're talking about audience, it's not just about word choice. It's also about what is most likely to interest them. How do we grab their attention? Which strategies and points from the article are going to be most enticing to them to learn more, most compelling to get them to listen to us? A couple other things you can notice in these examples that I just want to point out. Articles, those are in quotation marks. The titles of the articles are in quotation marks. The larger publications that they come from would be in italics. So think of anything that's part of a smaller whole is in quotation marks. Anything that is the bigger whole is in italics. Another point of this is that I'm always going to be formatting them correctly in assignment details. So if you see something in quotation marks in an assignment, then it should be in quotation marks when you use it. If you see it in italics in the assignment details, it should be in italics when you use it. Note also that even when we are being informal, we refer to sources by either their full name, Morgan Polikoff, or just their last name. We would not call this author Morgan. In this case, it's a thing about familiarity. I don't know Morgan Polikoff. Maybe you do. I don't think you do. We don't know this person, so we're not on a first name basis with him or her or they. What we do know is that they're the writer of this. And so as a way to show respect for that, we use their last name and not assume a familiarity with them we don't have. I also want to point out this, what we talked about, kind of signal phrases or buffer language in a summary that allows you to always be clear that it's the source's point of view you're presenting, not your own. So here you see Robert do this. With this same idea, the author brings in this. Polikoff implies, right? Referencing research, the author does concede. This kind of buffer language makes it very clear that Robert's not presenting his own point of view. He's presenting Polikoff's. And when we're trying to stay objective and when we're summarizing, it's essential that readers know what ideas are coming from the source itself and what ideas are coming from your brain. Because of course your brain is at work, right? And you're going to be having ideas and things you add to your essays. So you want to make sure it's very clear so that we don't risk misrepresenting a source or make it so that we don't understand that you're making an argument. So we want to make it very clear. By using this buffer language, I would use it in some form of it in every sentence you give us of summary so that we never get confused. I should be able to take any sentence out of a piece of writing and look at it on its own and know, right? Not just context. Also, just as a future thing, remember that when I'm talking about targeting an audience, that doesn't mean we're talking to them, right? This isn't a speech class. This isn't a class on writing emails, right? So you're not necessarily like saying, hey, guys, I got this thing to say to you. If you did it here, that's totally fine. But just as we're moving forward, I want you to think about when we're targeting audience, that doesn't mean we're addressing them directly. It means we're thinking about them in our word choice, in our content choice, in the way we structure it. We're considering them. That's what we mean by targeting an audience. Note also that concise and objective summaries will be part of your rhetorical analysis, since you'll want to present your chosen article's primary argument before you analyze it. So that will be in your introduction. You'll be presenting a summary of the article before you even present your thesis, right? Because we got to know what the article is talking about before we can appreciate your analysis of it. So speaking of what goes into your rhetorical analyses, let's look at what's coming next in Module 4. Module 4 is a big one, and I know I'm giving you a long class notes video to go with it. It's a lot of stuff to cover, and it's all important. We're talking about creating written compositions here, and that's going to focus both on process and on structure. So you're going to read that chapter in the text, and then I have a video. It's 2 parts, but it's focused on rhetorical analysis structure. what you do in the beginning, what you do in the middle, how you do it, how you order the paragraphs. It's a very practically focused video on helping you put together an outline, which is part of what you'll be doing this week. You'll take a reading and video quiz, and then you're going to read some examples. These examples are all available through MindTap. So if you haven't gotten your access to it yet, you'll have to do it now. These are rhetorical analysis examples. Some are drafts, some are polished ones. Either way, they're rhetorical analyses by other people. So that's what we're going to talk about on our discussion board. I'm going to ask you to identify one of them and then write about kind of identifying these parts of it, the thesis statement, the body, paragraph, main ideas, the evidence, the conclusion. Make sure you identify which article you've chosen in your subject line, because then you're going to be responding to 2 classmates' postings who address different essays. So if you pick the Choose My Plate one, you won't respond to threads that are talking about that one. You'll respond to threads that are talking about the other ones. And as always, remember, you can ask a question, you can add a detail, an observation, suggest a different way of looking at it, as long as it's not something that's been said already by either the poster or other replies. And remember, I love it when we compliment each other, that's great. But anything that just says, I agree with you, I agree with you, I agree with you, that's not adding anything new to the conversation. So you have to be adding something of content that is new in order to get full credit. And then you're going to do an outline. We have drafts of these essays due next week for peer review. And even though a lot of us probably hate outlines and think of them as extra steps that are unnecessary, they are a thinking process. They get us to think through all the points we're going to make before we start writing, which ultimately makes the job of writing the essay much easier. So however you choose to do it, these are the things you're going to be covering in that. And I am asking you to be as specific as possible. Don't just say in the conclusion, I'll conclude the essay, right? Tell me what points are you going to make. You can always change them later. And these can just be bulleted lists. They don't have to be, don't give me an essay right now. We just want to get to what are the points you're going to make. All right, I know that's a lot of information. Always remember you can rewatch these videos, which makes them maybe more helpful, particularly when we've covered so many things in this one. But as always, come to me if you have any questions. Drop by the Ask Ms. Corbett discussion board. I'm looking forward to moving forward with our rhetorical analyses in Module 4. All right, have a great rest of your Wednesday. Bye.